Welcome to SEC Sports Roundtable. This is your host, Shane Bailey. Back to take a look at actual football. We had a couple of issues, so we are ready to go looking at some live football action. And so we've got Drew Young joining us after a short hiatus. Welcome back, Drew.
Well, Shane, first of all, I'm glad to be back after serving my 18-month suspension for deflating the tires on my motorcycle, which I wrecked with a co-ed on the back.
While drinking underage?
While underage drinking, leaving a barbecue where we had, had some juniors on campus. Whatever the penalty was, I can't remember, but it's good to be back, to say the least.
Well, we're glad you're back. We've missed your humor, and well, we might even have a movie review now. It's been a while.
I haven't seen one in a while, but I could review one of the 87 I've watched in the last year or so.
There we go. We might have to go back into the vault there. And then from Bama Hammer, join us, Nick Jones. Welcome back, Nick.
It's good to be back. Good to be back. Finally, glad to have some football to talk about after doing all those, season previews. Now we can see, who was right, who was wrong. Get ready, get into it.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and start this podcast off by boasting, but I think we all started saying that Auburn wasn't what everybody else thought they were, and wow, they started to prove us to be right and everyone else wrong.
We always talk about, I think it was Missouri, maybe it was Missouri a couple of years ago, or whoever it was. No, Texas A&M. It was Texas A&M last year. Remember all the fans got after us and everything?
Yeah.
We love these teams. I love it when it's Auburn especially, but we love when these teams lay an egg the first couple weeks and, we can bask in our glory and then just forget about all the other mistakes that we make. So at least we have something to brag about for the first couple weeks.
Yeah, we didn't give Auburn high marks. I don't think any of us expected the performance the last couple weeks. Blair, I think, who couldn't join us tonight, made a astute observation week one. And it's like all you got to do is get Johnson out of the pocket, and you've got a chance to win. I think he was telling Britton that about Alabama playing Auburn, and I think that there's much more to worry about in Auburn than just the quarterback play.
Yeah, it's funny. Not doing these podcasts, I haven't, I didn't review the teams, but no, it's tough. Johnson was getting some reviews to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he hadn't played that much. So, I think that's tough. Saying this though, they're 2-0, so I guess I'd rather be in their shoes than some of the other teams. They're 2-0. They haven't looked good in either game. Javon Robinson, injured, we haven't seen what he can do, so they might have a little something for teams later. It might be this situation where they were overrated and then they become underrated, if that makes sense. So we can kind of see where they'll go from here.
So this is all a big scheme by Gus Malzahn to play the underdog card, is what you're telling me.
I don't think it's an underdog card, but you see it a lot when teams are like y'all are saying overrated, and then everybody writes them off. You forget that they're 6-0 and they do have a good football coach and they do have talent. So I would not be surprised if they come out and kind of shock some people here in the next couple weeks that are writing them off. That's just my opinion.
Nick, what do you got?
I did have the privilege. I don't even remember if I was on the Auburn podcast. I don't think I was, but I had the privilege of growing up watching Jeremy Johnson. He's a Montgomery product. I saw him in high school. I actually saw him in person for one of their playoff games, and he never impressed me that much. There's a ton of quarterbacks that have impressed in high school and never amount to anything. So not to write him off right now, but one thing was for sure to me is he wasn't a pocket passer. And that's not generally what Auburn does, but the first couple of weeks, they've just let him stand up and try to deliver the ball, and it's not working. So, I think we're right. We can talk about what's already happened. You can say it's unimpressive, but to me, you can't write them off yet. I would never write off an Auburn team. Anybody, Georgia fans know that. Alabama fans know that. You don't write them off. But, Shane, one of the things that has, come back to me is the conversations that we had time and time again last year. It's only 2 games, but we kept saying that, is it a trend or is it just something that, is it just a coincidence? But the fact that, some of these great minds like John Chavis and Muschamp are there to build great defenses, quote unquote, for these spread offenses. And Auburn, it's not working right now. You have to realize they have the same players pretty much from last year, barring Trey Matthews is there. They've got some JUCO guys and some transfers that are in there, but it's the same group. And if we're gonna go in depth, I think one of the biggest things for the defense is having Carl Lawson back. He did play limited snaps against Jacksonville State and in the first game against Louisville, and it was a very different defense with him in there. So I don't know if they're kind of icing him or if it's a true injury that's really hurting him. Or, I think it's not his knee anymore. It's like his hip or something. I can't remember. But if they can't get him back on the field, that's a big hole to fill. And, Muschamp may disappoint in his first year. But, it's only the second week.
It is, but what really will be the test for us is this week, week 3. I mean, they have an SEC opponent. It's LSU. LSU, we were somewhat, at least from the podcast, we always leave that podcast with Stephen coming on from In the Valley Shook talking. He always gets us ready to think that LSU's ready to win the West. But they get to go to Death Valley. They squeak out a day game. I don't know how they managed to do that, to get the day game at the CBS game for Auburn going to LSU. But we will really see at that point. I mean, what is this, 5 picks from Johnson in 2 games? Does that sound right? Did he get 3 the first week?
That's exactly right.
And while Drew, you're right in that they are 2-0. They're 2-0 against Jacksonville State in overtime. It took them to overtime there. They were outmatched, like you said, defensively. Jacksonville State, from what I could see on the golf course while I was watching that game, they were looking pretty good at times for a Jacksonville State to do what they were doing against Auburn. It leaves some concerns down on the plains. While you're right, Drew, at the end of the day, it's 2-0, and they're second in the SEC standings right now, or tied for second in the SEC standings right now. It's still cause for concern if you're an Auburn fan, at least in my opinion. We'll really know Saturday if we're right on or this was all just make believe and they fooled us again.
That you made my exact point I was going to say. I think this is one that you just kind of put a pin in, and you'll get your real glimpse on what the season looks like on Saturday when they play LSU. That's a game. Everything's forgiven. You go out there and you play well. You win that game. You're 3-0, and you've beat a Louisville team and an LSU team. I don't care if you had to go to overtime to beat Jacksonville State. Nobody's happy about that. But if they beat LSU, then I can assure you on the plains, Auburn fans are going to be happy with the way the season started. They'll be fine with that. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I know it's not time to pick games yet, but I'm calling that. I know they're a 6.5-point dog, but I think Auburn wins that game outright.
Wow.
Picked it on my pick sheet that I do every week. That was my pick, my stupid underdog. I like getting 6.5.
Now, do you like it because of 6.5, or do you think they're going to win outright?
I think they win that game outright. I just think I just think that they've made so many mistakes. I think that it's one of those types that this is my opinion. It's going to be one of those type seasons where they look horrible the first 2 games and they kind of start getting things together once they get once Johnson gets used to playing with this team and quits throwing the ball to the other team. I think they'll turn it around a little bit. I could be completely wrong, and if I am, maybe I'm not on the podcast for another 1.5 years, and I don't have to answer to it. So
I missed you on this podcast. What? I would have never. I could have seen you saying they're going to cover the points, but win outright. I couldn't take that. That's tough. Nick, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Drew, is right with the fact that that is history, right? I mean, 2014, Auburn did not look great in those first couple games. This is the year that they went on to lose to Jameis Winston in the national championship. I mean, look at the similarities in that game. I mean, in that season, they were breaking in a new quarterback in Nick Marshall, a guy that hardly anyone thought would be able to run an SEC offense. Turns out, he was probably the best quarterback other than Cam Newton for a Gus Malzahn offense. And then you look at they were still breaking in Trey Mason, and look what Trey Mason became later in the season. So it is kind of A smelly fish, I guess. That is a high number. I would definitely pick the under. I think it's going to be a close game, especially if LSU pulls it out. And if Auburn could run away with it on the road, I don't think they would. But 6.5 is pretty high. So I don't know if I'm ready to pick. I think it's going to be really close. But if Auburn comes out and looks great in the first half, Drew's going to make us all look silly. So I think it is smart to reserve what we're saying about Auburn, and especially against Jacksonville State, because how many times have you seen even Alabama last year playing Western Carolina, which is a much worse team than Jacksonville State, didn't look great. So we see this all the time. But the thing for me, though, not to jump ahead or anything, is this is a great week 3 when you look at SEC West. I mean, there's a ton of horrible games, a ton of non-conference games, but you look at this kind of action week 3 with LSU Auburn and Ole Miss Alabama. Not to say that no matter what team loses on Saturday of those 4 teams, they're going to be completely out of the West race, but you look how Arkansas looks right now, not great. You look at how Auburn's playing right now, and we've talked about how the SEC West is wide open. We're already getting a little bit of a look into what that looks like, but at the same time, we'll have a little bit more clarity, and it's only week 3.
You bring up a good point, and you can even go back to the Cam Newton days. When they won the national championship with Cam Newton, there were games they squeaked by, and you look at it and you go, how in the world did they ever win that game? And towards the middle and later parts of that season, it was solely because of Cam Newton and the steps he took to grow as a quarterback. So you guys are right. I mean, this Auburn program could turn out to be a contender for the West. But as we look forward to week 3's action, this really will be our first test to say, is Auburn for real, or are we just playing with ourselves here about how good they are? So we're gonna shut the door on those guys since we need to wait till Saturday's action. And do we want to flip over to the other side and talk about the other team that had some troubles last Saturday? Drew, do we want to do that now, or do we want to wait? Or do we not want to do it at all?
No, I'm happy to talk about it. It's I was able to get over it. I may have had a few outbursts during the Tennessee. For the people who haven't heard me in a while, I'm a big Tennessee fan, and that was a big game. Oklahoma coming into Knoxville to play Tennessee, and no, Tennessee looked good. They came out like they were supposed to, got up 17-0, and went into what I consider conservative mode. I was totally against it. Just thought that they tried to play. You hear that adage all the time: you're playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And I don't think that's smart football. I think that there was a lot of mistakes made, and Tennessee had to do everything in their power to lose that game. So, it depends on if you want to look at the glass half empty or the glass half full. The glass half full would say, this was an out-of-conference game. Tennessee wasn't going to win the national championship. Maybe you're okay with them just going in and if they're going to lose a game, rather lose this game as opposed to like the Florida game that's coming up in a couple weeks. Glass half empty, Tennessee still has another game where they could have made a statement, and once again they lose. The stat was out there that Butch Jones has the same record as Derek Dooley had in their first 30 games, or I can't remember the number of games, has the identical record. But I can assure you Tennessee fans are much happier with where Butch Jones has them than where we were with Derek Fooley or whatever you want to call him. So
I did see that stat, and I had to retweet that as well because I was a little amazed at that was there. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just the problem is as a fan, I didn't really understand a lot of the calls. If you watch that game, Jones declined a lot of penalties. It would be 2nd and 10, and they would get a holding penalty, and instead of being a 2nd and 20, or a 1st and 20, he would leave it at 2nd and 9. Not that that's a bad choice. It's just that I haven't seen coaches do that too often. Obviously, the call that people talk about is the 4th and goal from the 1, deciding not to go for it. I think it's a little short-sighted. He said, we make all our decision based off analytics, and analytics tell you that there was a good Sports Nation article or somewhere, I can't remember where I saw it, sorry, I would give credit, but they said that teams, I think, scored on like 64% of their plays from 4th and 1 from the 1 last year, which would have equated to like 4.6 points versus a field goal. The best you're going to do is 3 points. So my analytics say that you probably should go ahead and go for it. But, I just think that, like I said, I think they made a lot of poor choices, played conservative football, and I just don't think that's the way the game's being played these days.
Well, and you know my thoughts and love for Tennessee. So even with that being said, I can't discredit Butch Jones for taking the 3 points at that point in the game because it was early. I mean, was it not late in the first quarter when they had that opportunity to kick the field goal?
Early in the first quarter. It was their
second drive.
It was I think it was their first drive. I think they intercepted the ball and then drove down to get in that position. Might have been their second drive, but it was early in the game. No, I mean, it's just, my thought is you've got 102,000 people there, and I didn't get it to go to this game, but it's as loud as the stadium's ever been. They broke 114 decibels. I mean, they're talking about how crazy the crowd's going. My thought is if you don't score, you've got them at first down from the 1 yard line more than likely. And if you're not going to go for it, I think another thing Tennessee says is, why in the world do you not have Jalen Hurd in the game? Instead, you've got Alvin Kamara in the game, which I like Kamara, but he's not a power back as much as Hurd is.
Well, they had him in the third down play too, right?
Yeah, that's the point. They had Kamara in for the third down play. Well, you can say, well, okay, maybe it was just time for him to go out. He needed a breather, but there was a timeout before that third down play. So I mean, I just don't think it was a great decision. Hindsight's 20/20. I don't think that lost the game for them. I think the fact that Tennessee could not tackle the quarterback, it looked like they wwere diving at his feet instead of just wrapping up. It was kind of sickening to watch. And then you let a quarterback roll out in the pocket for 8 seconds. You're putting your linebackers and your defensive backs at a disadvantage to try to cover that long. So a couple of holding calls and then just an egregious pass interference call, which, on one hand, do y'all know the play I'm talking about where
that would have been a catch if he wasn't pushed.
Yeah, if he was Calvin Johnson on stilts or something. I mean, it literally hit the brick wall, but that's 12 feet behind the end zone.
He still had his hands on it though.
No, he didn't. It was 10 feet over his head. It was totally uncatchable.
Yeah, but when he was landing against the wall, he had his hands on it.
Correct. He totally got two-handed shoved into the brick wall. So I would have probably called that too. I just don't really understand if there must be no such thing as an uncatchable pass. But I thought the worst reffing was the two missed false starts. Oklahoma false started twice. They false started on their touchdown in overtime as well. But what are you going to do?
Maybe it was so loud in Neyland Stadium that they couldn't see.
Yeah, probably so. Tennessee fans are going to quit going, man. It's just you just can't. I mean, it's just heartbreak after heartbreak. There's so many close losses, and it just shows you. I mean, you have to learn how to win, and Tennessee's not completely there yet. So, I'm still optimistic about the season. I think it much more hinges on the Florida game and the Georgia game and the Arkansas game. Those are the big games more than this Oklahoma game. Of course, we want to win this one, but in the grand scheme of things, Nick, Shane, did y'all think Tennessee was winning the national championship?
Well, you stole my pick. I mean, I thought they were going to, but after this,
yeah, exactly. So no, I mean they're not going to win the national championship. So how much does this game hurt? You want to win the SEC games because I do think, call me crazy, I think there is an outside chance Tennessee could play their way into the SEC East. I think that's still open. South Carolina, I mean, Shane, you can tell us right there. They're not the toughest if they can't get by Kentucky. So
I think they were an extremely tough opponent. That was a quality win.
It was, yes. I think. So I mean, you look at it, and Missouri's beatable. It's down to Florida and Georgia. That's the cream of the crop so far, and I don't think anybody expects Florida to be there. So obviously, this is Georgia's for the taking.
And I'll say this: there's one team that we always forget to mention, and that's Missouri.
Missouri, yes, I know, but whatever. They're garbage. Nobody likes Missouri, right?
Nobody does, but they always just seem to find a way to win.
They just go to the SEC championship every year. So
that's right. So that was my pick for number 2. I had Tennessee number 3 in the East. If you were looking at how I would rank them, and I had Missouri as number 2 behind Georgia, just because of what they've been able to do for the last 2 years. And they basically have some of the same pieces, and so can they put those together again and put together a pretty decent season? Well, they get the East, so they've got that going for them. So I've got Missouri as number 2, and Tennessee still does have a chance to be number 3.
Yeah, I mean they did well against a tough team like Arkansas State last week. I know we've got some Missouri fans that listen, so I'm sure I'll get some hate messages, but no, I still don't believe in them.
Well, they have to prove me that they're bad this time, because I'm going to go with them. Because I've been just burned the last 2 years. So, but I get burned every time I think Tennessee's going to lose and they win. So.
Well, that doesn't happen too often, Shane.
Happens more than I like. Nick, did you get to see the game?
Yeah, I caught the especially overtime. And one of the things I was going to mention is after that fourth quarter, that was one of those games, kind of like when you knew that when Auburn was going off, when Jacksonville State just kneeled on the ball and decided to take it to overtime. That was one of those situations that you kind of knew, well, the game's over now. It doesn't matter how long it's going to take, but Auburn's going to win. I don't know from a Tennessee fan's perspective, but watching that game from afar, it didn't feel – you didn't get – that was one of those games you just did not get a good feel going into overtime. And, like you guys have mentioned, the play calling was off. There's so many things. And this is one of those games that Drew was talking about as well, one of those games that you just let slip away. And, a quality opponent, coming to Neyland, obviously it's a big game. You don't get these very often, especially in the landscape of college football now. And, a lot of people are making a big to-do about, Big 12, SEC, all of that. And, yes, it doesn't look good for the SEC to lose any game to an out-of-conference opponent. But, Oklahoma is probably a solid number 3 in the Big 12 for a conference that's very top-heavy but has 2 really good 1-2 teams. So I don't know. It's not the end of the road for Tennessee. Definitely not. It wasn't even a conference game. And these are the games that it takes to build a program. People don't like to hear that, but close losses like this, if you play them the right way, coming out of them, they can be building blocks, as Butch would say. So I don't know. Brick by brick, exactly. And it is definitely one that you wish you had, but the season's still very young, and there's a lot to like about Tennessee.
I think the biggest loss is Kurt Magette. Once again, great luck for Tennessee. Have a guy hurt a hip on a non-contact, like covering a punt. So he's out for 8 to 10 weeks. He might not be back until late November, if that at all. So just guy can't stay healthy, man. It kind of kills you, and he's the heart of the defense. What I don't understand is why can you jump up and down if you got a broken bone in your hip? He's jumping up and down on the sideline. Same with like Des Bryant. He shouldn't be able to walk. I'm not bitter or anything. It's not like I have him in 4 fantasy leagues. But it's just one of those things where, good grief, it's just snake bit. You just get tired of your leaders getting hurt. And saying that, I'm sure Dobbs will break his arm this weekend or something. So.
Let me ask you this, Drew, because Nick said something, and I've heard it on the radio up here, and he's right. I did kind of witness that. As Oklahoma started to come back, you kind of just felt like Tennessee didn't have that, put your foot down, stomp them, keep them from coming back kind of mentality there late into the fourth quarter and as they were headed in overtime. As a Tennessee fan, did you feel that way as well? It's like when they started making that comeback, you go, you know what, we could lose this game?
Shane, I'm going to be completely honest with you, and you've watched games with me, so you know this is true. I honestly thought Tennessee was going to lose that game in the third quarter, up 17-3. They just when you sit there and you wait and hope somebody else keeps making mistakes and do not play to win, it's such a bad feeling of conservative. You might have to get the bleep button ready because it makes me so mad to talk about this. It's just sissy football, if you know what I'm talking about. They just absolutely are not playing to win. They're playing to hope that the other team keeps messing up, and they are playing to hope that somebody, please God, somebody else make a play. You've got to do it. Tennessee did any one of those plays. All you have to do is not pass interfere, sack the quarterback. Todd Kelly Jr. makes 2 interceptions, and why the hell can he not stay on his feet? He intercepts the ball at the 25 and falls down. And then, of course, what's the next play? Jalen Hurd fumbles the ball 15 yards back, or Dobbs takes a big sack. You have a 48-yard field goal, which I know a 48-yard field goal is not an easy field goal to make, but Aaron Medley has yet to make, he's missed 3 field goals on the year. I think he's like 1 of 10 from plus 40 in his career, something horrible like that. Don't quote me on that stat, but it's really poor. Any of those plays happen and Tennessee wins this game. But instead, they don't make the plays, and what happens? All the momentum goes to Oklahoma's way. They extend drives. They score on 4th down. In overtime, they score late with 40 seconds left. Tennessee does not try, with 2 or 3 timeouts, does not try to advance the ball, which I'm not saying I would have done that at that point either. I think the game was over at that point. Like you said, Nick, I had no thought that they were going to win that game. I was shocked that Tennessee scored in overtime. No, you cannot play that kind of conservative football. You have to play to win. That's why you've got coaches that don't ever punt. Y'all have heard about that high school coach that literally has done the statistic analysis.
I love that coach.
He never punts. He onside kicks every time. He says possession's so important. It's the way
he goes for it on 4th down every time.
Yeah. And he started talking about now where he's like he wants to incorporate lateraling all the time. Because on plays where there's a lateral, usually a big play happens. It might not work, but I'm telling you, it's the style that people. I remember when I would play like Madden or NCAA football with a buddy. And I would always play kind of by the rules. Like if it's 4th and 7, I would go ahead and punt. And they're like, I'm never going to punt. Punting's no fun. And guess what happens on 4th and 7? They get it every time. It's one of those things where going for 2 and not punting and onside kicking. Obviously, there's something to it. I mean, look at the teams that have been successful. I'm not saying that that's going to win you a national championship because I would, if I had, my druthers, I would just be Alabama and play the way they play. They don't have to play that way. And that's why Alabama's my pick to win the national championship every year because, they do have the talent to not have to play that way. But I think for teams that are trying to claw their way back, I don't think you can be a conservative football coach.
Well, and the worst thing that's going to happen is your fans are going to appreciate you try to do everything you could to win, right?
I just think that you look at the last 15 close games Tennessee has played, and they've won maybe 3 of them, 2 of them being South Carolina. I think if you're aggressive, maybe you make some stupid plays and lose some games, but I don't think you're going to be any worse than 2-13. So why not stick your neck out a little bit and say, we're going to try to win games as opposed to losing them? Because guess what's going to happen, Shane? After a while, you're going to start winning them, and then your players are going to say, we can win this game. So they're going to get aggressive and get that mentality that they can win. Right now, if I was a Tennessee player, I would think we're snake bit. I mean, you've heard me say it. I feel like Tennessee's cursed, like former sold his soul to the devil to get the '98 national championship, and that's why, there were 2 games under Dooley that they went into. They called the game over and then somehow put time back on the clock, and they lost those games. You've got just the Georgia game where Pick Howard fumbled diving into the end zone. You've got this game where they blew a 17-point lead, the biggest lead ever. Yeah, I mean, Tennessee fans think they're snake bit. Well, why do we think that? Because we don't know how to win. We've just got to get back to knowing how to win. So I think you have to take the bull by the horns. It's like I play golf a lot, and if I'm playing in a competition, when you start waiting for the other guy to make a mistake, that's when you know you've lost. You've got to be the one that kind of steps on somebody's throat and put a ball close or go for it on 4th and 1 and just say, here I am. We're gonna beat you. We're gonna blow your doors off, and I don't care what you do. You
got to be tin cup and pull the 3-wood out and go for the.
Absolutely. Sometimes,
Sometimes you miss. Sometimes you don't, though. Right.
It's the greatest 12 in the history of golf. 10 years down the road, nobody's going to remember who won the Open. They're going to remember that 12, Roy. Sorry.
Right. So we'll close the book on the east side of Tennessee. Here in Middle Tennessee, has your buddy Chad Caldwell, is he on a ledge about Vanderbilt football? Is he ready to jump off the ledge?
He's calmed down after having multiple kids now, but. No, I mean nobody's happy with the way that's gone. You can't go from having be the doormat of the SEC for years and years and years, then get a James Franklin and claw your way back, and then quickly 2 years later you're a doormat again. Losing to Western, and then And then honestly playing decent against Georgia, but not ever being in that game. So I think we all know. I mean, I would not be upset if I was a Vandy fan if Derek Mason got 2 years and was done. I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know if that's a good thing to do at Vandy. But do y'all think that he's going to turn it around?
No.
No.
So why not just go ahead and try something else? Offer James Franklin, $12 million a year to come back.
Yeah, the crazy thing to me, I mean, this is state the obvious, but it's becoming so apparent, what James Franklin did. I mean, he is still trying to make it at Penn State, doing decently well with, what he was handed, kind of like the Vandy situation, to be honest with you. But, to get them to 9 wins and get them to bowl games, in back-to-back years and consistently being a bowl-ready team and even scaring, teams like Alabama on the road and, Tennessee and, what he did. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And you have, we talk about this all the time, but just the quality of players. It's like Stanford, how you have to have those quality of players at Vandy and how tough it is to compete. But somehow James Franklin found a way. Honestly, I still don't know how he did it. But, Derek Mason was one of those guys that, they bet on him, having that experience at Stanford. It's not working out now. But, as Shane has said before, I think you have to have a dynamic guy, somebody willing to work the press, kind of like I've always said with UAB here, now that UAB has a program back. You've got to be able to work the press, and you've got to find a way to get – there's a ton of fans in Nashville that would love to watch football, but not too many of them are going to go down to Vanderbilt on a Saturday or, even watch the game. So
Wait a second. UAB got their program back?
I know. I just broke news here. They did. Yeah, they really did.
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
Yeah, they did.
I remember hearing that they canceled. I don't keep up with UAB.
Well, 2017. They're coming back in 2017, but they announced that it's coming back.
Well, good for them. They have 0 players because some of them even went to Western to help Western beat Vanderbilt. So we'll tie it all back together.
Yep.
Who's that? Like, didn't Rodney White? They had a good player at one point at UAB, right?
Yeah, Rodney White. And then,
Rodney White. There you go.
Joe Webb went there. If you know who that is.
Joe Webb, Minnesota quarterback for a while.
Yeah.
/ receiver / whatever else.
I see what you guys are saying, but I'm wondering if James Franklin at some level had the Urban Meyer disease, in that he knew what was coming back wasn't that great. And while Urban Meyer got sick, in air quotes here, for those that are listening, he got sick and had to leave the game. Florida was going to be in shambles whether he was there or not the next year. And from all indications, I mean, even when Franklin finished the season before he left town, there was talk that this next year's Vanderbilt program, last year's program, was going to take a step back and there was going to be a rebuilding to it. So, maybe he knew something and knew that, I'm going to leave at the highest peak I possibly can be at Vanderbilt because it's going to go downhill a little bit from here. And can I get it back up to that same level in a year or two? And maybe he knew that, and that's why he jumped ship. And Mason wasn't aware of how bad things were in the house of Vanderbilt. And it wasn't, from a talent perspective, where it needed to be. I mean, even though he had some decent recruiting classes, we all understand what those stars mean. They don't mean a whole lot. If you just are on somebody's list, you can go up a grade in your star level. So maybe it just wasn't the talent really wasn't there at Vanderbilt, and it didn't matter who you had in here. There was going to be that issue because last year, as bad as Vanderbilt was, I didn't see those guys give up fight. When you're watching them on the field, they didn't give up and say that we're beaten, defeated. But from a talent perspective, they're just not at the same level as some of the teams in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't love that comparison. I think Urban Meyer really did leave Florida. I don't think he was not thinking they were going to win. I mean, that guy obviously has shown. I mean, you don't win national champion. Did he win 2 at Florida? Did he win 2 at Florida or 1?
2, 96 and 8.
Yeah. Well, 2006 and 2008. Yeah.
Yeah.
He won two national championships. I don't think you win 2 national championships and then think, well, I don't think you're afraid of rebuilding a little bit. I think he's just a flip flopper and wanted to spend time with his family, and then figured out it's not that much fun to spend time with your family. So he went to Ohio State. I do think you're right on James Franklin. I think James Franklin saw that there's a ceiling. There's a big difference between Duke and Northwestern and Stanford and Vanderbilt, and that big difference is the reason we have this podcast, is because Vanderbilt plays in the SEC, and you get as good as Franklin got them. Your best might be 8 wins, 7 wins. I don't think he was going to get to that next level, and I think Penn State has proven that. I mean, you can win there. You can win national championships at Penn State. So I think he saw an opportunity to go to a traditional top 20 school in the country and get paid to do it. So I think he just jumped at it. That being said, I don't like where Vanderbilt's headed right now.
Yeah, it's not a good time. I mean, to be a Vanderbilt fan. At least you got baseball and pitchers and catchers report in February, right?
And basketball. They're going to be. I think they're going to be better in basketball too.
And that's not something they've had to be a lot to be excited over the last couple of years.
No, they still trot out Kevin Stallings for the 93rd year, however long he's been coaching, but he's a proven coach. I mean, we'll see what they do in basketball.
But I mean, back to the actual game at hand. You were right. Vanderbilt played a decent game, but even their decent game wasn't enough to. I mean, would they lose by 17?
Yeah, lost by 17.
I mean, to Georgia. So I mean, while that's a respectable loss as far as that goes, because it could have been, easily 28-30 point loss to Georgia, who most everyone I think has picked to win the East. So you would expect, if you were a Georgia fan, for it to be a higher margin of victory. So in that aspect, Vanderbilt did the best they probably could in that scenario. I'm just looking at the other teams that we have to cover. Do we need to cover Alabama, Middle Tennessee State, Nick?
I mean, there's really not much to get out of that. Jacob Coker didn't look nearly as good to me as he did. It was the first time I've seen him, start a game in person, but he didn't look nearly as good as he did in the first game. Saban would hate to hear this, but it probably was that they weren't psyched up to play Middle Tennessee. It's kind of an afternoon game, a little warm, a little weird time at 2, or I think it started at 2, I think, or 3 maybe. It doesn't matter. But I don't know. There is going to have to be more consistency on his part when it comes to this week. And but luckily no new injuries. They do have one of the safeties is out this week, which may hurt Alabama. A lot of people thought that the guy that's stepping in could have started to begin with. So I don't know. The big thing about that, Alabama won, avoided injuries. Nobody looked horrible. So
yeah, and Alabama's not a team that's going to just destroy the lesser opponents, unlike Ole Miss and how they dismantled Fresno State. I mean, but historically, when you look at Alabama, am I wrong in that Nick Saban's not one to say we're just going to put up 60 on somebody?
No, you're exactly right. You look at it, and I think it's either a smart move by the way of taking guys out so they don't get injured, or getting young guys playing time. And Saban was really upset when it came to the Middle Tennessee game and Wisconsin, because Alabama played the 2s and the 3s. They played the 2s against Wisconsin, and Saban was not happy with the way that the 2s competed. That's what people make fun of him, saying that he's a stickler, but that's true. When you're in Alabama, these freshmen, they're not getting much playing time. You don't have too many freshmen in Alabama that walk in and play, and if they do, they can walk in anywhere and play, obviously. So, getting these guys reps, I mean, that's one of the, a lot of the critics have said about Alabama in the past is some of these freshmen aren't willing to work like they were when Alabama was building the program, and that's why a lot of people think that the secondary is slumped off, for instance. But you're right. Alabama is normally, they're always a little dangerous in those games. When you see, I looked back last year, I think it was on my Time Hop or something, Alabama was like a 35-point favorite. Or maybe it was a 40. I think it was 40-plus point favorite against FIU last year, whoever we played this week last year. So be wary, not condoning, sports betting, but be wary when you see a high line like that, because Alabama, normally is about good for 38 to 45 points in these type games, and then they're going to put in the twos and get some other guys work.
Yeah, but I don't think that was the case with Ole Miss. You know, they wanted to see how many points they could score. I didn't get to watch a lot of that game. I had a guys' weekend and was on the golf course quite a bit, but you know, that's 2 weeks in a row that Ole Miss has put up some impressive numbers, and that really sets up a great Week 3 matchup that I think most people are excited to watch in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, they put up 149 points in 2 weeks. I think they scored 76 and 73. Nick, I don't think they're going to drop in the 70s on Alabama. But what it does set up that's kind of fun is you know, I don't feel like Mississippi's going to play with them that well. Like they're Mississippi kind of reminds me a little bit of the Missouri type team where I just don't respect them, and not that I don't respect them, but I don't expect as much from them. And shoot, they're a top 20 team, 21 somewhere around there in the country. So, or they're even better than that. I think they're 17th in the country last week. So, is that what they're now? 15?
Yeah,
they were 17 last week. They're 15. So, number 15 team in the country, and I don't feel like they're going to, play with them. But, maybe they will surprise me a little bit. I'm sure you've probably scouted them a little bit more knowing you're going to play them. But I don't know what to expect in that game. I guess if I had to pick it, I would say that Alabama's going to cover that 6.5 points, and that would be my pick just because it's Alabama and Ole Miss. Now, I know what happened. They lost to them last year, right? Wasn't that the game?
Yeah.
So, but it's just one of those things where, I think that you look at it right away and go, oh, it's Alabama. They'll be fine, and they'll do what Alabama normally does. But, maybe it'll be the same thing as last year.
Well, and this is not the same Fresno State as, 7 or 8 years ago that always had a really good team out on the field and could compete with anybody, correct? I mean, this is a different Fresno State than what we're kind of used to. They're back more middle of the pack where putting up 21 is probably a pretty big number for Ole Miss's defense, as good as everyone thinks their defense is supposed to be, right?
Yeah, you're right. Just look, they had Derek Carr 2 or 3 years ago, who's a guy that, if you listen to NFL scouts, they're still talking him up, waiting for him to come back from injury this week. So you're right. This isn't the Fresno State that we used to see on, like Thursday Night Football and those late night.
So that's why Amari Cooper didn't catch anything.
It is, because his quarterback went out in the second quarter. So, but you're right. This isn't the Fresno State of old. Back when Jim McElwain was there, they had a couple other guys after him. Nussmeier, Alabama's former or not McElwain, he wasn't there, but Nussmeier was there. Alabama's former offensive coordinator. They used to put up some pretty big normal.
Who was the guy with the great stash that coached him?
I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
Drew, do you remember?
I'll look it up. No, I was looking right now. I was just looking at Wikipedia, and I was like, Devontae Adams was at Fresno State too. So yeah, they've had some skill level players there. I'll look it up. I can't remember who it is though.
You're fine. But we all agree that it's not the same Fresno State that has that same level, and for their offense to put up 21 points against a defense that some folks were considering one of the best in the SEC, that's got to be a little bit alarming, especially coming to Alabama, who has got revenge on their mind. Whether anybody in the locker room has circled that game, secretly they've all circled that game.
Yeah, it's a big SEC West. Saban would always tell you that it doesn't mean anything. It's just the next game, and no matter what, it's a big game because it's a quality SEC opponent. SEC West implications coming into Bryant-Denny. I think I notably said a couple of years ago that I've been going to Alabama games since I was 4 or 5 years old, and that was the probably one of the top non-Alabama LSU or Alabama Auburn games that I went to 2 years ago when Ole Miss came to town and we beat them 21-0. Just atmosphere, fan involvement, the way that the team responded. I think a couple games last year eclipsed that for me. But, there is no doubt. You got a new quarterback. Chad Kelly looked great the first couple weeks. I think the biggest concern for me, especially after this last week, is Alabama, replacing some of their offensive linemen. Dominic Jackson, who's a great run blocker, and has been already this season, had a horrendous time against Middle Tennessee's edge rushers. You know what these guys look like. They're like 6'4", 250. They would be playing linebacker at Alabama, but they're really fast, and he was having major issues with it. I don't know if that's going to get ironed out this week, but when you've got Robert Kendichi and that great defensive line that they've got coming in, that is cause for concern. But, just a stat, Nick Saban hasn't lost games to the same team in back-to-back years since 2007, which, of course, was just a horrendous year. That was the year we lost to Louisiana Monroe. And then Ole Miss has never won back-to-back games in this ever against Alabama. So all that to be said, it should be a really fun matchup. I think Alabama's defense, if they win, will be the difference maker. You've got a high-powered offense and Ole Miss coming in. They're going to want to go fast. It's going to be interesting to see how Alabama handles that up-tempo team last week, but a very different quality opponent. But, the thing to me is Alabama's going to have to hit a couple big plays. We saw that last year. It was kind of a low-scoring game for what you would think, an Ole Miss win would be. But Alabama constantly – this was kind of the first game that the secondary was really exposed, and we saw Bo Wallace getting out of the pocket, hitting some big plays, especially to Laquan Treadwell, and Ingram, their tight end, had a really big game against Alabama last year. Alabama's going to have to match that. So far, they haven't hit any passing plays for big yardage. Coker's looked really good decision-making-wise, but all the big plays have been coming on the run, and whether that be shovel passes to Kenyon Drake, who I think could have a really big game, or Derrick Henry, who had a great first game, 3 touchdowns last week, which is pretty incredible no matter what team it was against. But, it's tough for me to pick Ole Miss. I know I'm extremely biased, but I think last year we really saw what Alabama had, what they were bringing to the table. I still will maintain that Alabama extremely outperformed last year. That wasn't a fluke or a hoax that Alabama lost to Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat them on the field. And there were some games that Alabama really should have lost last year that shaped up very similarly to Ole Miss. But I'm looking at the LSU game, especially on the road. So I think Alabama is more consistent on the offensive side of the ball this year, and they should be on the defensive side of the ball. But the secondary really hasn't been tested. And if Chad Kelly can stay in the pocket, avoid the rush that Alabama's going to bring, there's a chance he could pick them apart. But Alabama's got some new faces that have played pretty well this season, which is encouraging if you're an Alabama fan.
All right. So I'm with you. I think that Alabama's going to win that game. I'm not as big as an Xbox-like numbers that Mississippi's put up. I want to see real competition. Now, a team that should have put up Xbox numbers and didn't was Arkansas, losing to Toledo, a team that I was high on at the beginning of the season. I've got some concerns there. Their quarterback looked erratic. He didn't look comfortable. Wasn't accurate. Was it Allen? Is that his name, right?
Yeah. Right.
He didn't look very accurate. And that's going to be some concern because Texas Tech is still not a great opponent. They've got a high-powered offense, and could be some cause for alarm from Arkansas. I mean, did I see a statistic right that their passing to running percentage was just lopsided to the pass, and that's not Bielema ball. So why did they not run the ball in Arkansas? That's what they have been built on. That's what everybody knows them for, that smash mouth football. And if they can't do that, if there's a problem with them being able to run effectively, I don't think they're going to have a chance, not only against Texas Tech, but to compete at all in the West.
I mean, I think that they tried to run it and it didn't really work. I mean, Alex Collins, rushed 20 times for 54 yards. I mean, you're right. That's not Bielema ball. They're used to, pounding off 6-7 yards a carry, and they weren't able to do that. But yeah, I think you get in it's one of those games where you get down to it and you don't feel like something's working, so you completely abandon it. It's not the right move, but as a coach, you just don't feel like it's going to work. You're afraid of it, so you go to something else. And And in this situation, it didn't work out for them. I mean, they lost that game. It's funny. It's kind of like Auburn. That's what I'm saying. Is here's the team that if they could have just pulled this one out, all was forgiven. Now I know that Toledo is not Jacksonville State, but a loss is a loss to a game that you schedule for a win. I mean, they're not. If you want to play a good out-of-conference team, you're not scheduling Toledo. You're going to schedule an Oklahoma or a Ohio State or somebody like that. You have no reason to ever schedule a game like Toledo unless you're 99% sure your team can pull it out. So I think that's a bad loss for them. Arkansas was that trendy pick, and the West is too hard. You can't lose games like this.
Yeah, it was 2.5 to 1. Allen threw 53 times, completed 32 of them.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, you look at even teams like Alabama who have relied on the run for the past couple of years. You can't. I mean, 20 times for 50 yards or whatever you said. That's obviously a horrible percentage, but it's one of those things that you just have to force your hand. I mean, Brandon Allen's not a guy that should be throwing it 53 times a game. I don't care what offense he's in, especially in Arkansas's offense, but he really shouldn't be throwing it 53 times a game. You look at maybe 15 to 25 times that he should be throwing it. So
yeah, those numbers should have been flip-flopped.
Yep.
The rush to pass.
But, that to say, Texas Tech, it could be a problem if Arkansas gets down. I think that influenced the play calling as well. Toledo was pretty much, hanging close with them the entire game. It wasn't like Arkansas got out to a big lead or anything and then lost it. So I don't know if it was a coaching or a play calling mistake, what happened, but Arkansas's offense really couldn't move the ball, and obviously the defense couldn't save them.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough game going against such a high-powered offense. It's Texas Tech. I mean, I think what I'm looking at shows that they're third, in the country in points per game. So that's a tough one. But I think it's. I mean, I don't want to overreact. I still think Arkansas is going to win this game. I mean, they're still a quality, and they just have to bounce back. It just was a bad loss. It could get out of control, though. You lose back if you do, mess up and lose this game. This could be one of those seasons where you look at it and you're sitting there going, can Arkansas win 9 games this year? Can they win 8 or 9, games? And you look up and they're going to win 3 because they're about to get into their gauntlet of SEC West games too. So I think this is a game they've just got to put away and show that they were who we thought they were at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, this is an Auburn type of performance for both of them, and this is week 3 when we're saying this about programs. That's what's crazy. Now, did you get to watch did either of y'all get to watch the LSU Mississippi State game?
I barely did, so.
I literally just went and got in bed and just cried myself to sleep after that Tennessee game. So I did not see a snap. Just looked up the score the next day. So
I didn't get to watch all of that when Mississippi State, realistically, I don't think anyone outside of Mississippi State fans and folks like Blair had Mississippi State winning this game. It was much closer than I was expecting it to be. Mississippi State did a great job of hanging with LSU. Actually had some opportunities there. They missed the 2-point conversion to tie the game earlier in the game or late in the fourth quarter, and then had a chance to win it as well. So Mississippi State had some chances with LSU, and even had a chance with the field goal late. But LSU's starting to put their pieces together. This is the kind of win they needed, especially for their first game, to go on the road to Mississippi State, who was extremely excited to have LSU come in, and Fournette and LSU to put on that performance and come out with a win. LSU needed a win no matter what the score was. If it was 1 point or 20 points, they needed that win against an SEC West opponent, being their first game, being on the road, not getting a warm-up game because it got rained out. This was an important win for LSU, especially for the simple fact that they're also going to have one less game. They're going to have a Florida scenario this year with that one less win that's a guarantee on their schedule that's going to help their bowl chances. So if they do get a loss or two down the road, that overall record is going to be impacted because they're not going to have that win and can impact what bowl they go to later in the season. So this was a big win for them.
Yeah, Shane, that's a really good point to point out. I don't think everyone thought that Mississippi State was going to have another magical year. It was a great year last year. They still have some pieces, but you're right. To focus on what LSU did is really the storyline. But to stay on Mississippi State just for a second, there were some people. Obviously, Dak is probably still one of the best, if not the best, quarterbacks in a very down SEC quarterback class. But still, nonetheless, he probably is top of the class. But it really proves what they had last year. All those seniors, all those great defensive linemen, and the defense in general, how great it was. And the loss of Josh Robinson. You really saw at times Mississippi State's inability to move the ball against LSU. I mean, LSU, of course, does have a respectable defense, but for Mississippi State, like we're talking about, it's only week 3 coming up, only week 2 back, last week, but we're getting a little bit more clarity in the SEC West. Not to say that Mississippi State could still win the Egg Bowl. They could still sneak up on Alabama because Alabama has to go there this year. But I think you're right. LSU not having that warm-up game, all the questions at quarterback, still a little bit unanswered. But when you have a guy like Leonard Fournette, just a world-class running back, you can hand him the ball, trust your defense, and you're going to win games in the SEC.
Just to kind of go off a little bit, I agree with what y'all are saying. I think that being with the first game getting lightninged out or whatever, which is kind of crazy to think that happened actually. But was that weird? I mean, I don't remember lightning. I mean, there were so many lightning delays that first week. Did they used to just play through lightning and is that like a new rule, or was that just like a freak thing that just happened in week 1?
I don't know the exact specifics of it, but they have the rule now where it's like 6 to 8 miles away from the stadium.
You have to wait 30 minutes between each strike. Yeah. But anyways, what I was going to say was, no, I think that was a good win just to go ahead and get under their belt against the SEC West team. What's crazy is look at the special running backs we have in the SEC this year. Fournette is a beast. Obviously, look what Chubb's done. They're rushing for like 180 yards in games and scoring 2 or 3 times. Obviously, Derrick Henry. A great game, and throw out Jalen Hurd. He's had 200-yard games. He's got 250 yards rushing in 2 games and scored 4 times, I believe, somewhere close to that.
Boone Williams for Kentucky.
He did. He went like 70-something on his first carry, didn't he? But that's just and Alex Collins. I know he didn't have a good game the second game, but he had 130 yards rushing in their first game. It's just I think there's some special running backs in the SEC. And we're kind of going back to some more vintage, a little more old school to see those big running backs. Where you kind of had a time when it was the quarterbacks that were doing everything. And kind of it's funny. I think that we all the SEC lack what they lack in quarterbacks. We're having to say is Dak Prescott the best quarterback in the SEC. They're turning to these running games, and maybe these quarterbacks don't matter as much, and you do need more of the game managers like Alabama's had with whoever they've had in the past. I feel like that's always what Alabama has. I can't remember the last time they had a guy that was just a stud quarterback. They usually have the guys around them, and then a guy that just doesn't lose the game for you. So I think that it's a fun time in the SEC to see is this guy going to rush for 200 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. And I agree. I think Kenyon Drake is an awesome player. I think he's going to break out, and people don't really know about him, but he's impressive in what I've seen so far.
So we mentioned the Missouri squeaking by Arkansas State 27-20. I think we all admit that that's about as far as we can go into the Missouri program, other than we know that Missouri is finding a way to win. They always seem to have the last couple of years, and we keep discounting them. So we'll keep discounting them another week and see what happens.
They got Connecticut. They should be able to take care of them.
And so that's a pretty easy 3-game setup to get them started.
Well, schedule somebody. That's what I said earlier. It's tough. Maybe that's smart. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do. But
it worked for Vanderbilt, right?
Yeah, they play Western Kentucky every week, but
I meant in the Franklin era.
Correct. I say that, and I mean, and somebody's gonna be like, "What about Tennessee? They're playing Western Carolina," but obviously, they just came off of a pretty tough game.
But now I'll say that they have 3 cupcakes generally, but the last 6-8 years they've always had a pretty decent opponent that's out of conference, have they not? I mean, you had Oregon a couple times.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they've played Oregon, they've played Oklahoma twice.
Played Cal one year.
Yeah, I mean, you see Cal, Notre Dame. They've played them numerous times. I don't know. They had Ohio State, I thought, on the schedule, but I think that kind of game fell through. So I mean, yeah, I mean they're going to play tough matchups.
You got Virginia Tech next year, right?
Got Virginia Tech. That's going to be a pretty cool game. I'm excited about that. I'm definitely going to do my best to go to that. I mean, to see, can we fit 160,000 people at a football game?
In a racetrack. For those that don't know, Tennessee is playing at Bristol at the racetrack.
I think it'll be pretty cool.
I think that's cool too. I hate that you all are doing it and not somebody else, but I do think overall it's a really cool thing, and with the tie-in to being that close to Blacksburg and Bristol, and because part of Bristol's in Virginia, right? There's a Bristol, Virginia, a Bristol, Tennessee. So I mean,
it's right on the line, yeah.
It makes great sense and great football. So I think that will be a cool thing to get done. East Carolina played Florida, and that was a game that you expected another game. I mean, this is a theme that we're seeing. Is this game shouldn't have been a 7-point game, right? This game should not have been East Carolina 24, Florida 31.
Well,
or should it have?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you look at it. I mean, they were matched up, and this was a rematch from last year's bowl game. I mean, I don't know what. Obviously, Florida had a very disappointing season last year, but I mean, ECU is a pretty decent team. They've been a bowl team in the past, but I mean, it shows. If it shows anything, it shows us that McElwain inherited not the best. I mean, they do have talent. They've got Taylor in the backfield, but the struggles at quarterback are still concerning. But
what he inherited was Will Muschamp's temper.
Yeah, he did. I mean, that was very funny because McElwain, Saban keeps all the coordinators from the press, and I almost freaked out when I saw him doing that. I mean, I'm sure that Taylor probably deserved it, or I mean, that was just coaching. A lot of that didn't get caught on camera, but that was very unlike McElwain from what I can tell. But maybe it is just walking in Muschamp's footsteps that gets you going like that.
There's something in the water down there. They let you go out and drink at halftime, so maybe he had a little pop or something at halftime, or before the game.
He's been hanging out with the USC coaches, right?
Correct. Yeah, him and Stark are hanging out.
Halftime, talking plans. But East Carolina's a good program, but I was expecting a 10 to 14 point margin of victory or more. To be at home at the Swamp against East Carolina, a team, like you said, is a rematch from a bowl game. That's something that you expected. From the outside looking in, I was expecting Florida to be able to handle that a little more than just a 7-point win.
Yeah, well, I think a win's a win for Florida right now. I mean, I think they'll take anyone they can get.
Well, let's hope they don't get one next week, because we're going into the next team that they're going to go up against, and that was Kentucky.
It tells you something about Florida there. I know this game's at Kentucky, but Florida's only a 3.5-point favorite in this game. So, and I don't think anybody thought Kentucky was going to be gangbusters. I know they're 2-0, but that's a little surprising. Seems like a low spread to me. But
was it Herb Street? I don't want to give him credit if he wasn't, but somebody gave him 8 wins in the SEC. Somebody from ESPN gave Kentucky 8 wins.
I have no idea. Was it like Tim Couch or something? Does he do SEC Network or something?
Jerry Lorenzen.
Yeah.
Jerry.
No, I mean, hey, a shout out to Kentucky, man. I mean, that's a good win against South Carolina. I mean, that's a game that I can't imagine they were expecting to win, and to get that win is pretty impressive.
I think Kentucky fans were expecting a win. I was. And right. I mean, you look at your schedule, and when we did the Kentucky preview, Drew, there's not too many games out there that they can win. There's not that many wins out there to get to 6 wins. They're going to have to find a couple. non-conference. They've got Louisville as a non-conference tough game. They've got at the end of the season, and so you can't guarantee that that's a win for Kentucky. They can't do the Vanderbilt guaranteed 4 out of conference wins. They've got 3, so they got to win a couple of SEC matchups, and that's one that as a Kentucky fan you circle. You go, that's one we've got to win.
Shoot, they hadn't won a road game in what? I mean, it'd been like 3 or 4 or 5 years since they had won a road game. So, I'd say, yeah. I think you'll take that at Kentucky fan for sure.
And they almost didn't realistically. I mean, I don't know if you got to watch that game, but I mean, it was a Jekyll and Hyde performance because the first half, South Carolina couldn't do anything to stop Kentucky. I mean, everything they were doing was converting into points, and everything South Carolina was doing was maybe converting into a field goal attempt. And so South Carolina turned things around in the second half and were a 2-point conversion that went the other way from tying it up. And that ended up being the difference in the ball game for Kentucky. So while it's a great win, it's the first road win in a couple of years for Kentucky, it's still, it had remnants of the week prior because the second half was a completely different Kentucky team than the first half. And you've got to be able to keep – I think Kentucky needs to do a much better job of scheming for the second half and finding ways to come out with some success because both second halves has not been a stellar performance on either week for Kentucky. They've done enough to win, but when you look at it by and large, there were lots of things that a lot of chances Kentucky had that they weren't able to capitalize on. A lot of 3-and-outs in the second half. And going forward against a team like Florida and anybody else that they're going to face, you're going to have to find ways to convert a couple of those in the second half to extend the lead, especially when you had that kind of lead going to the half. If not for anything, to keep your defense from getting exhausted and to take time off the clock. Did I miss any team? Oh, A&M. Do we need to talk about them? They beat Ball State. There, we talked about
them. There you go.
and I say that we actually have Texas A&M fans that listen and like our stuff. We shouldn't be so mean.
The best ever is some guys just sitting there, waiting. And you're like, did we talk about them? Yeah, it's done.
Yeah, and now we're in. But realistically, I mean, it's Ball State. It's one of those that they did everything they're expected to do. I mean, they're the 16th ranked team in the country last week. They win 56-23. That's what you want to see out of that type of program. Yeah. So if you're a Texas A&M fan, you should just be ecstatic that we've got nothing to talk about. The only reason we did the Alabama in depth at all was because Nick was here. Or we'd have done the same thing for Alabama this week.
Yeah, and I will say just really quick, going back to the first game as well, because we really didn't get to talk about that. What has impressed me is Kyler Murray is a real deal. We saw them a lot. I think he was a 4 or 5-star guy he's a 5'10" quarterback with some extremely great wheels, and he just looks scary for Texas A&M. I mean, they benched Kyle Allen for multiple possessions in a row against Arizona State in a very close game. They're in the second and third quarter. And he reminds me a lot of Johnny Manziel, a much faster guy, a guy that could be even more accurate than Johnny Manziel. So, I don't know. That was just something I wanted to point out. A huge recruit, freshman, getting playing time. Nothing new at Texas A&M, but he was very impressive to me.
So as we look, thank you, Nick. I really wasn't aware of that. So that's something I'll have to keep an eye out on A&M going forward for next week. As we look at next week's matchups, we already talked about Missouri and UConn. Shouldn't have much to preview there. Mississippi State at Northwestern State. That's not Northwestern, but that's Northwestern State. So I don't think we need to cover that one in depth. Texas A&M's matchup again this week is Nevada. We talked about the Auburn-LSU game. Austin Peay at Vanderbilt. If there's a win on their schedule, this is one of them for Vanderbilt.
Vandy needs to win this game.
And if it's a loss, they just need to close their football program. They need to do a UAB and take a couple years off.
Self-imposed death penalty.
They got to do something. South Carolina at Georgia. Does South Carolina have a fighting chance here?
No.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts too. I mean,
I think they get boat raced. It's a 16.5 point spread, and I wouldn't love it, but I wouldn't be that scared to lay the points.
well, and Georgia has a few things still to prove. I mean, every year,
We don't know about their quarterback. That's right, Shane. I mean, that's the scary thing.
that is true. He's not been tested, and B, can he pass that test?
Yeah, I mean, I think you like a lot of stuff that you see with Georgia. I mean, obviously you love Chubb, but their quarterback play is just it's just scary. I mean, they haven't really gotten much this year, so that's what they need to step up and see if they can get somebody to fill those shoes and be a quarterback for them.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're Georgia, with that being said, I mean, we don't know if their quarterback's going to be Patrick Tolles, but you look at last week's rushing. Kentucky put up over 200 yards rushing against South Carolina. So that's an encouraging statistic with 3 rushing touchdowns. So if you're Georgia and you've got Chubb and
Marshall.
I wanted to say Marshall, but that didn't sound right. Marshall carrying the ball. There should be no reason why you can't control that game, even if you're not sure at quarterback still.
No,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick. You're good.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think this is a win, even without Lambert having to even hardly, he probably will not be in a pressure situation. Of course, they're not going to put it in his hands to win the game, but I don't even think South Carolina is going to be able to stop the run. So Georgia will probably line up with Chubb and Marshall and say, stop us if you can. I don't think South Carolina can, so Lambert probably won't be tested again, which, if you're a Georgia fan, could be scary depending on what Alabama brings to the table, when you open up SEC play. But
yeah, but you want to put him in position where he's going to succeed.
Yeah,
and that's the opportunity right there. You get a big lead. You don't have to have that pressure, and you're going to put him in passing situations for him to succeed. What were we going to say, Drew?
No, I was gonna echo those statements. Exact same thing. I guess the flip side is it's not like South Carolina's not having a gangbuster play at the quarterback position either. So I think you can kind of even it out a little bit. But no, I mean, I still think that's scary. I think that's the scary part for Georgia. I don't know that they're worried about this game, but I think they've got to be a little nervous about finding out what they've got at quarterback. Because think about this. Think about the last 15 or so years. Georgia's just always seemed to have that guy that plays quarterback for 12 years. I mean, they had David Green. He played there for 7 or 8 years. Aaron Murray was there for 7 or 8 years. They haven't had unrest at the quarterback position. So
Hudson Mason was there for a decade.
I think Mason did he play 1 year? Is that all?
Yeah, but he backed up Murray the whole time.
Yeah, but I mean, if you really go back, I mean, they had Aaron Murray and they've had David Green since 2000, it seems like. So they have guys that somehow get 6 years of eligibility. So Georgia hasn't had to go through this like other teams have. So I think you've got to be a little nervous if you're a Georgia fan.
Now, let me ask you guys, because I don't know. Does anyone know what the latest is on Connor Mitch? Is he going to be able to play? Because I know he went out of the Kentucky game with a shoulder injury.
I read something today where they're going to start a former walk-on, so I think he's out 2 to 3 weeks. There's something to do with his shoulder and his hip. I saw a picture of his hip. It did not look very good, but I don't think he's going to play this week.
So that's even more cause for concern if you're South Carolina.
I think they've got a lot to be concerned about, but yes.
So does Tennessee have a problem with Western Carolina this week?
God, I hope not.
We talked about Arkansas, Texas Tech. We talked about Kentucky, Florida, and we talked about Ole Miss, Alabama. So we covered the previews while we did the podcast. We're getting efficient here, guys.
That's why, hey, after about 6,000 of these things, you should get efficient, right?
Yeah.
Longest running SEC podcast ever, right?
Probably so. I mean,
no way. I mean, it's got to be.
Because if there was one, it started after us, right?
Very true.
All right, so we just got to get our iTunes problem fixed, which I'm working on this week. So hopefully this will all be back on iTunes by the end of the weekend. So, Drew, anything you want to close us up shop with?
No, I mean, like I said, it's good to be back. It's funny you skip these things for a while, not by choice all the time, but just you get busy living, and I still listened occasionally when I could, and through things when Blair talked about SEC baseball, like I always want to do, but that's just it's for everybody. I'm happy to be here. It's fun to talk about football. I'm trying to be an optimist. I'm sure I'll slip into my pessimism when the Tennessee doesn't play like they're supposed to against Western Carolina. I will say this: nobody will remember this, and nobody cares, and I don't expect anybody to. But my flag football team, we are on a 3-year winning streak. We have won 20 straight games, back-to-back champions. I'd say over the course of those 20 games, the total scores have been about, somewhere around 700 to about 58. Just dominating teams in flag football. I mean, I think just like Saban's got his statue outside of a stadium. Bryant Denny, is that right? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to get a statue outside of the Brentwood indoor soccer arena pretty soon. If I keep winning. So look for that if you're taking a trip to Nashville. You want to see some landmarks. Go check out my stadium that's going to be erected in Brentwood soon.
Will that be right next to one of the Frisbee golf holes?
It is right. It's the exact place. Yeah, play a little Frisbee golf, a little froth, catch a flag football game, and go from there.
Well, awesome. So now I don't know if you realized that you said a line from Shawshank Redemption or not, but
get busy living, get busy dying. Or
yeah, and you got a red room, so Red said that, right?
What did I say?
Get busy living.
Oh, is that what I said?
Yeah.
I didn't even catch it.
And you're in a red room, so it's like there's too much to not say what you just said. So.
Shane, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things. So I might go to Zaywataneo and try to restore a boat or something.
There you go. I'll come walking if you're gonna give me a load of cash.
Be so happy.
Just don't drop the soap.
Yeah, true.
Nick, what about you?
No, I mean, it's great to have Drew back on after a long hiatus, but also, enjoy Week 3 good football. We've already had some surprisingly good football games with Arkansas and Auburn, but enjoy especially these 2 games. And if you're a fan of neither of those 4 teams, if you're a Missouri fan, enjoy your game against Connecticut. But football is back, and, we've only got, 12 or 13 more weeks, so savor it while it's here.
They're short-lived. They're like a flower. They're fleeting.
And we don't. I mean, you're right though. This is next week's not as good as this week as far as the slate of games. I'm kind of looking 2 weeks ahead. So yeah, enjoy that Alabama Ole Miss game. That should be one of the games of the season in the SEC. So
that's the weekend that everybody needed to schedule their yard work, is what you're saying.
Not for me. I mean, it's Tennessee, Florida. It's it's one of our biggest, if not in my consideration. I hate to say this, but the biggest game. I mean, that's the game Tennessee's got to win to have a chance. So, but for everybody else, looks like it's going to be the CBS game too. So,
good for you. Well, Drew, we're glad you're back. We miss your comedic relief and your insight both. And somebody to pick on when I want to pick on Tennessee. So
I'm here to help.
I'm glad you're able to join us again. So we appreciate it, and we want to thank everybody. Like I said, we're having iTunes issues, but go out there, subscribe, like us, find us anywhere you can in RSS feed, and we will get that problem fixed so you can have this in your podcast area every time we get a new episode. And with that, we will call this podcast done.